Everyone, my name is Jessica Guadalupe Tovar. And before I get started, I do want you to know a little bit more about me. Because I used to be a community organizer here in Richmond. And I did a lot of work organizing around the oil refineries here in the Bay Area, not just Chevron, but also the one in Rodeo, and helping with policies around all the refineries, all five. There used to be five that were operating out here. And there was other campaigns I worked on as well, from different corporate operations. I didn't have oil refining in my community, but I did have a lot of gas-fired power plants that produce electricity in my community, as well as a lot of different factories where clothing was made, factories like slaughterhouses, and a lot of chemical operations as well. And I grew up in housing projects in East LA. And just outside of my home, I could see huge transmission wires, electricity transformers. I also saw when these cables would break and live wires of electricity would hit the ground. There was a lot of pollution in my community, including diesel traffic, because the main street that I lived on was a corridor where huge diesel trucks, like huge trucks, would drive by into these different factories and businesses. They were so big that my house would shake at 4 or 5 in the morning when that traffic was going in and out of these factories. One of the hugest factories was very famous. I believe it's no longer open, but it was the Farmer John's slaughterhouse. They produced bacon, hot dogs, and other types of kind of lunch meats, right? So in metropolitan Los Angeles, people were stunned to hear my story because they never would have imagined that by my home, huge truckloads of hogs would go by every day. And they smelled horrific. It always smells so bad. That was normal for me. I didn't know that it smelled so bad. It was also normal for me to have headaches all the time, to not be able to concentrate in school. And unfortunately, what was normal and common, which really wasn't good, was the incidences of asthma, rashes, nosebleeds, and cancer in my community. Yeah. My mom is a cancer survivor. My grandmother eventually died of cancer. And when I worked here in Richmond, a lot of people I worked with also died of cancer. And some of those people used to work in the refinery. And it was no coincidence that they were immigrants. I share that story because there's an old saying that I am you and you are me. And we share a lot of comments, right? So when I was a young adult, I learned that climate change and the pollution in our communities are very much tied together. So as I did work as an environmental justice organizer, my elders taught me that there's not just this problem in this one community, but a greater global issue. And that the pollution produced in our communities is what's contributing to climate change. And when I was an organizer here, we also knew, and I'm pretty sure this is still true, that Chevron is the largest contributor to climate change in the state of California. And Chevron, there's two. In LA, there's also a Chevron refinery, and it's known as El Segundo. But some people say, most people say, El Segundo. Most people call it El Segundo. It's directly tied to energy, and that is directly tied to the climate crisis. Okay, so I want to speak a little bit about the work that I do at the local Clean Energy Alliance. And I want to ask you if some of this is familiar to you. Have you heard of community resilience hubs before? If you have, just raise your hand. Okay. A little bit more about that. I just wanted to check in if we were able to pull the, no? Okay. Okay, all right, no problem. So let's talk about climate change and what that looks like. And I want to ask you, in living here in Richmond, are there things that you see that signal to you that climate change is happening? Can you think of an example of that? Feel free and say yes.
Yeah, for example, in the mornings, sometimes it's raining, and in the hub is hot in the afternoon.
Yeah. But when people would lose their job and they didn't have groceries, they would go to their church for donations, right? And I'm sure some of these services are similar when, for example, a family member goes missing and the family needs help, and I'm talking about immigrant families, monolingual, Spanish only. They would go to their priest. They wouldn't call the police. They wouldn't, they would go to trusted places and trusted people. And in the communities I worked with, it was oftentimes their church and their pastor or their priest, right? If the PG&E bill has not been paid for 3 months and it's about to be cut off, similarly, people would go to their church or they would go to some kind of nonprofit service in their community. And I remember in North Richmond, people would go to their community development center. Why? Because there were services to help people prevent their electricity from being cut off, right? And so these places, be it the church, be it the community development center, be it a community group, folks would help each other to fill out the application that you needed to prevent your electricity from coming off, or if it's been cut off, help you get it back on, because it costs money to get it back on too. And
Great.
so we're really doing a lot of work around equity and clean energy solutions. We also recognize that our communities sometimes don't own their home, sometimes don't have the money to put forth for solar and battery storage. And one of the best ways for us to have access is in the resilience hubs. And we'll talk a little bit more about why. So, and this is really just to name that it's not just low-income people, but it's all kinds of people, elderly, disabled people, youth, folks that are even incarcerated. We all have a stake in having access to electricity, because we see it as a human right, but also that it's not cut off, even if you can't pay it. If you didn't know this, that fire was caused by a downed PG&E transmission line, and 85 people were killed. And the majority of them were elderly and some disabled. That's a problem. If you lived anywhere else in the Bay Area, you experienced a lot of smoke, so bad. We had smoke so bad that our air quality was really, really concerning, and folks had to wear masks, right? Because once you get that smoke in your lungs, there's no getting it out. And if you have asthma, it's going to aggravate it. If you're exposed for too long to smoke, you might develop some kind of respiratory illness, but also you can actually, become ill from that. So the other fires that are named in these headlines was also the fire, looking for it. You might recall the fire that happened in Los Angeles in early 2025, I think it was, which burned a lot of communities, right? So this is a direct cause from climate change. The fact that we have the fact that we have less rainfall, for example, right? And the fact that when you have less rain, you have more plants that are dried up, and that creates an environment for kindle for a fire. The best resilience hub and easiest one to plan around is one that already exists that people are gathering at, going to for services, or already part of. So wherever they might go for programs, services, any information or connectivity with the community, existing built and natural spaces, and places that might already have power systems and backup, or where that could be added, so the solar and storage that I mentioned. They have to have operations and maintenance staff, because you don't know when the hub is going to be needed, right? Like it could be an emergency situation. It has to be accessible and maybe near transportation, ideally someplace you can walk to. So if you have a community center down the street, a church, for example, that's ideal. A lot of agencies and government agencies have the resources, but they're not providing this infrastructure for our community buildings. They're normally doing it for fire stations and police stations. Now, yes, they might need that infrastructure too, but what about our community centers? So that's been at the heart of a lot of our work. This is at Dr. Reverend Ambrose Carroll, and he has an organization called Green the Church. And he says, we envision a future where every Black church is a clean energy hub for their community. We already go to church for food, shelter, and for community. I ask, why not go to church for energy? And this is just a photo to share. We did some. Mentioned,
a quick introduction. We have a really amazing group here today. The climate health promoters are here, and this is a really important topic for them.
To explain a little more why some communities have those resources. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about our communities, my community and your community having a lot of sources of pollution, right? But a lot of where this happens is oftentimes in communities of color, in immigrant communities, in low-income communities, because this industry targets our communities, right? And unfortunately, there's this assumption that, if you try to put this in a rich neighborhood, that there's gonna be resistance. And if you put it in a poor neighborhood, people are too busy or they won't notice, or they don't know better, right? So there's literally studies that were done, like one was done, I think in the early 80s, called the Sorrell Report. And that report literally instructs dirty corporations to open up shop in communities of color, in communities where English is not the primary language, in places where folks are desperate for jobs so that they can tell you, oh, we're coming here to bring jobs, right? And then you're like, great. And then they open up shop and nobody really gets a job there, or you get hired and you don't get to stay there. This is a practice that is done intentionally by these dirty corporations. They'll hire just to meet a quota, and then they'll let you go immediately. And it was really because they wanted to operate in your community and take advantage, right? Because at the end of the day, they will do their business, and like Chevron's still here, they've been here for a long time, but then there's other businesses that'll do their business, leave, they'll pollute for decades, leave and move out, but then also we find out later, oh, they're long gone, but they left a lot of pollution even in the soil that they're no longer accountable for because they're gone. Or maybe there were a lot of people working in that plant, but now they've left this community and those people are unemployed and it's economically depressed. So there's a pattern of that practice, and we call it environmental racism in our community, and we need to hold our decision makers accountable to using the resources and the money they have to do those investments in our community. And I was invited here because, and I want to say, not that because you want to do resilience hub work. Richmond's been doing that for a long time. We've only started calling this type of work resilience hub work. And you have a very popular youth center here in Richmond, and I believe, remind me the name of the youth center. The Rise Center, that's right. Which started out as a youth center, always been a youth center, always bringing, I remember going there and there was a young man who would teach the youth how to make videos and make little documentaries and how to edit them and how to post them on YouTube. And the youth were very empowered to create videos about what they see every day in their community and the issues that they want to address. Later on, it became more and more of an intentional hub where now they actually have solar and storage on the hub, and it's become kind of an influence for a lot of other communities. So we need to do a lot more of that throughout the different communities within Richmond. Because like I said, it's ideal to be able to step out of your home and walk to a location than it is if you lived all the way in North Richmond and folks are, well, go to the Rise Center. Well, how do you get over there if, it's ideal that you would be able to walk to a location. AI industry is this generation's next threat to climate and environment, because AI data centers are electricity hogs, right? They're water hogs because they need water to cool off. Just a lot of it is similar to the refinery. The refinery is by the water because it uses water to cool its operations, right? So there's a lot of very similar things. It's also energy intensive to create gasoline. So the AI data centers are similar, actually. And in addition to that, like when we're talking about fighting for the things that we need and that are good, we're not going to get the AI jobs. As a matter of fact, it's AI that's going to be taking our jobs away. So it's a job killer, it's an environmental killer, right? And it's also a climate killer because the electricity it's going to be using is going to be primarily fossil fuel. They use backup diesel generators, so they contribute to air pollution as well as water pollution. And there's so many problems with AI, and it's really out of control, actually. So I am not a proponent of AI. I think it's very problematic. And as the aunt of a soon-to-be 20-year-old, when I think back to being a young person and wishing that there were more opportunities for me, so I could have very easily not have been in this chair, right? I went to continuation school. I was a bad kid. I skipped school. I did all the things. But we're really now moving into an era where there are no entry-level jobs. When I was young, you would go to the mall, apply, ask for an application, and fill it out right there. There's no mall anymore in most places, and every application is digital. And for some people, good luck navigating that, right? So no, this is not anything that I support. We need to be very much cautious about that, because the Bay Area right now is a huge target for the AI industry, and it's been. Yeah.